He was found on a bathroom floor. He was 42 years old. The king of rock and roll was dead, and that single fact, announced to the world on August 16th, 1977, wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a mystery that is still not solved. We know the what, the when, the where. We just don't know the why, or maybe we don't know the how. The official story was a heart attack, a cardiac arrhythmia, but that was too simple. It felt wrong. This was a man who seemed larger than life. Men that big don't just die from a bad heart. Not like that. Not on the floor of a shag carpeted bathroom. People immediately suspected something else. The whispers started almost at once. Drugs, suicide, a conspiracy. The official story felt like a curtain pulled over a much darker scene. In the hours and days after his death, 10 different drugs were found in his system. Not illegal street drugs. These were prescriptions. Painkillers, sedatives, laxatives, sleeping pills. A cocktail that could stop a heart. His doctor had prescribed thousands of pills for him in the last year alone. His body was a wreck. He was bloated, overweight, and suffering from a list of ailments that would cripple a man twice his age. Glaucoma, high blood pressure, an impacted and diseased colon. He was in constant pain. So what happened? Was it one pill too many? Was it a body that finally just gave out? Was his doctor a murderer or a man trying to help a desperate patient? Did the people around him try to save him, or did they help him die? Why did his own father seal the autopsy report for 50 years? Every answer just leads to another question. And these questions have stayed with us, unanswered, for decades. Number 15, what was the real story? With Ginger Alden. Ginger Alden was the last person to see Elvis Presley alive. She was the one who found him. She was his fiancée. Or was she? Their relationship is one of the most debated and confusing parts of his final months. It was a whirlwind. He met her in November 1976. He proposed just 2 months later in January 1977. He was dead by August. That's not a lot of time. To the public, she was the beautiful young woman who was going to save him. The one who would finally make him happy. She was 20 years old. He was 41. He gave her cars, jewelry, a massive diamond engagement ring. He paid off her mother's mortgage. On the surface, it looked like a fairy tale. The king had found his new queen, but the reality was much messier. People inside the Graceland Circle, the group of friends and employees known as the Memphis Mafia, had their doubts. Many of them didn't like her. They saw her as an opportunist. They said she didn't seem to love him. They said she was more interested in the lifestyle than the man. In her own book, Elvis and Ginger, Alden paints a different picture. She writes about a loving, if troubled man. She talks about their plans for the future, their wedding. She insists their love was real, but the stories from others clash with her account. Linda Thompson, Elvis's long-term girlfriend just before Ginger, had a very different relationship with him. Thompson was deeply involved in his life, trying desperately to get him off the prescription drugs and to take care of his health. She was a constant presence. By all accounts, Ginger was not. She often chose to stay at her mother's house instead of at Graceland, even when Elvis begged her to stay. Some said she was embarrassed by his weight gain and his erratic behavior. Elvis was lonely. He was terrified of being alone, especially at night. He needed someone there. He had broken up with Linda Thompson because she wanted a more normal life, one not dictated by his nocturnal schedule and his dependency on pills. He found Ginger shortly after. Was he really in love, or was he just filling a void? He proposed to her in his bathroom, the same room where he would die. He reportedly told her, "I never thought I would find it in my own backyard." It sounds romantic, but it also sounds like a man grabbing at the nearest option. Their final night together is telling. He had a dentist appointment late on the night of August 15th. He came back to Graceland around midnight. He and Ginger talked about their wedding plans. He played the piano and sang to her. Then he told her he was going to the bathroom to read. That was the last time she saw him alive. She later said she told him not to fall asleep in there, and he had a habit of doing that. She went to sleep in his massive bed. When she woke up hours later, he wasn't there. She found him on the floor. The questions about their relationship cast a shadow over everything. If she was the love of his life, why was she so detached? If she knew he had a habit of passing out in the bathroom, a clear sign of his drug use, why wasn't she more concerned? Why did she just go to sleep? Others in the house that night included his cousin Billy Smith and his wife Jo. They were close with Elvis. They knew his habits. Was anyone checking on him? What we still don't know is what was really in Ginger Alden's heart. Was she a naive young woman caught up in a world she didn't understand? Was she a cold opportunist who saw a meal ticket? Or was she just a person in an impossible situation, dating a man who was already in a death spiral he had created for himself? And the most haunting question of all, if Linda Thompson had been there that night instead of Ginger, would Elvis still be alive? Number 14, why was he going to a dentist at midnight? It sounds strange. A dentist appointment after 10 p.m. For most people, that's an emergency. For Elvis Presley, it was just part of his schedule. On the night of August 15th, 1977, just hours before he died, Elvis went to see his dentist, Dr. Lester Hoffman. He left Graceland around 10:30 p.m. with his cousin Billy Smith and his girlfriend Ginger Alden. He was there to have a temporary porcelain crown fitted. It was a routine procedure. But nothing about Elvis's life was routine. He lived his life backwards. He slept most of the day and came alive at night. His world was a bubble, sealed off from the 9-to-5 reality most people live in. So a late-night visit to the dentist wasn't unusual for him. Dr. Hoffman would open his office whenever Elvis called. It was part of the service he provided for the biggest star in the world. The real question isn't about the time. It's about what happened there and what happened after. Elvis was in pain. His teeth were a constant source of trouble, a problem that plagued him for years. This visit was for a filling, but it points to a larger issue of his overall health. The more critical question is what he was given for the pain. It's widely reported that Dr. Hoffman gave him a prescription for codeine tablets. This was on top of the cocktail of other drugs he was already taking. Codeine is an opiate. It's a depressant. It slows down your body's functions, including your breathing and your heart rate. It can also cause constipation, which was one of Elvis's most severe and chronic health problems. Adding another depressant to his system was like pouring gasoline on a fire. His body was already struggling to function under the load of pills Dr. Nick was prescribing. So why would a dentist give a known drug abuser more narcotics? Dr. Hoffman was questioned after Elvis's death. He maintained he did nothing wrong. He was treating a patient's pain, but did he know the extent of Elvis's other prescriptions? Did he talk to Dr. Nick? In the world of Elvis, the normal rules of medicine seemed to be suspended. The priority was keeping Elvis happy, keeping him comfortable, keeping the show on the road. This last dentist visit is a crucial piece of the puzzle of his final hours. He returned to Graceland after midnight. He was upbeat. He talked with his cousin. He played racquetball. He sat at the piano, but the codeine was now in his system, mixing with everything else. The medical examiner, Dr. Jerry Francisco, initially mentioned that the dental work could have been a contributing factor, though he later focused on the heart. But the timeline is impossible to ignore. He takes a painkiller for his tooth. A few hours later, his heart stops. It's easy to blame the doctors, and they certainly have a lot to answer for. But Elvis himself was part of the problem. He was a master at manipulating people to get what he wanted. He knew how to shop for doctors. He knew what to say to get a prescription. He could complain of a toothache, a sore throat, a twisted ankle, and get a bottle of pills. He had done it for years. The unanswered questions from that night are chilling. Did Dr. Hoffman have any idea he was handing Elvis a potentially fatal dose? Was there any communication between Elvis's various medical providers, or was each one operating in a silo, unaware of what the others were prescribing? And the most difficult question, did Elvis deliberately seek out the codeine, knowing the effect it would have when mixed with his other drugs? Was that final dentist visit an excuse to get one more fix? Number 13, what happened during that last game of racquetball? After the dentist, Elvis didn't go to sleep. He wanted to play. Around 2:15 a.m. on August 16th, he woke up his cousin Billy Smith and his wife Jo. He wanted to play racquetball in the court he had built behind Graceland. This late-night activity was typical. It was when his day was just getting started. He went down to the court with Billy, Jo, and Ginger. What happened on that court is a sad snapshot of his physical decline. This was a man who, in his youth, was a bundle of raw physical energy. He was a black belt in karate. His stage moves were electric, athletic, but the man on the racquetball court in the early hours of August 16th was a shadow of that. He was overweight, short of breath, and sweating heavily. They didn't play a real game. They just lobbed the ball back and forth gently. According to Billy Smith's account in the book Elvis and Me, written by Priscilla Presley, the mood was light at first. They were joking around. But Elvis was clumsy. He hit himself in the leg with a racket hard enough to raise a welt. Then he tried to toss the ball to Joe, and it slipped out of his hand, flying backwards over his head. It was a small, uncoordinated moment, but it was a sign of how disconnected he was from his own body. After a short time, they stopped playing and moved to the piano just off the court. This is where the story takes a darker, more poignant turn. Elvis sat down at the piano. He played a few songs. His voice, by all accounts, was still powerful, still beautiful. He sang Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain and Unchained Melody. Like, these are heartbreaking songs of loss and longing. They were the last songs he ever sang. Think about that moment. A few hours before his death, in the middle of the night, a physically broken man sits at a piano and sings one of the most emotional songs ever written. Was it just a casual moment singing a song he liked, or was it something more? Was he singing about his own pain, his own lost love, his own feeling of being chained to a life he couldn't escape? The people who were there have described the moment as incredibly moving, almost spiritual. It was a glimpse of the real Elvis, the artist, buried under the weight of the celebrity, the drugs, and the failing health. It was a reminder of the talent that was still there, even as his body was giving up. After the songs, they all walked back to the main house around 4:30 or 5 a.m. And Elvis went upstairs with Ginger. Billy and Joe went to their own trailer on the Graceland grounds. The next time anyone would see Elvis, he would be dead. This final burst of activity raises so many questions. Why the sudden need to play a physical sport when he was in such poor health? Was it a desperate attempt to feel normal, to feel young and athletic again? Was the singing a cry for help, an expression of the deep sadness he was feeling? Or are we just reading meaning into a random series of events because we know how the story ends? What we do not know is what was going on in his mind during those final active hours. Was he happy? Was he scared? Did he have any idea that he was singing his own requiem? Will kill him. In early August 1977, a book was released that rocked Elvis Presley's world. It was called Elvis: What Happened. It was written by 3 of his former bodyguards, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler. They had been fired by Elvis's father, Vernon, the year before in what they saw as a cost-cutting measure. The book was their response, and it was brutal. This wasn't a loving tribute. It was a tell-all in the truest sense. It detailed Elvis's escalating drug abuse in shocking detail. It described his violent temper tantrums, his paranoia, his obsession with guns, and his bizarre spiritual quests. It told stories of him shooting out television sets and ordering his guys to take out people who had angered him. It painted a portrait of a sad, isolated, and dangerously unstable man. For the public, it was the first real crack in the carefully constructed myth of Elvis. Up to that point, his image was tightly controlled by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. The press was generally respectful, but this book came from the inside. These were men who had been with him for years, who were part of his inner circle. Their words had the ring of truth. For Elvis, the book was a devastating betrayal, and Red West in particular had been one of his oldest friends going all the way back to high school, and Elvis had tried to stop the book's publication. He had his father offer the publisher money to kill it. But it was too late. When he finally got a copy and began to read it, he was reportedly heartbroken and furious. He couldn't understand how his friends could do this to him. He felt exposed, humiliated. The bodyguards always maintained that their motive was to save him. They claimed it was a desperate, last-ditch effort to shock him into reality. They hoped that seeing his behavior laid bare for the world would force him to get help. They called it tough love. But many people then and now saw it as an act of revenge. They had been unceremoniously dumped from the payroll, and this was their way of getting even. The question that has lingered for decades is what effect the book had on his state of mind in his final days. He died just 2 weeks after it was released. The timing is hard to ignore. Did the stress, the shame, and the anger from the book contribute to his death? Did it push him deeper into depression and drug use as a way to cope with the pain of the betrayal? Some friends, like his road manager Joe Esposito, believed the book hit him hard. He was already in a fragile state, physically and emotionally. He was scheduled to start a new tour on August 17th. He was worried about facing the public and the press with these stories now out in the open. So the added stress on his already weak heart could have been a significant factor. Others argue that the book was just one more problem in a life full of them. His health was already catastrophic, his drug use was out of control, his finances were a mess. He was lonely and depressed. The book may have been a blow, but his body was on a collision course with death anyway. In this view, the book was not the cause, but merely another symptom of the chaos that had engulfed his life. We will never know for sure what he was thinking in those final 2 weeks. How much did the betrayal from his friends weigh on him? Was he more angry than hurt? Or was he so deep in his drug-induced fog that it barely registered? The book remains a tragic footnote to his life. If the authors truly meant to save him, their attempt failed in the most catastrophic way possible. And it leaves us with a terrible question. Did an act of supposed love actually serve as a final nail in his coffin? Number 11, was Colonel Tom Parker to blame? Colonel Tom Parker was Elvis Presley's manager. He was more than a manager, he was the architect of the Elvis empire. He discovered him, he molded him, and he controlled almost every aspect of his career for more than 2 decades. He was a brilliant promoter, he was also a deeply controversial figure, and many people lay a large portion of the blame for Elvis's decline and death at his feet. The Colonel was a carnival barker at heart. His philosophy was simple, never mind the art, focus on the money. And for a long time, it worked. He made Elvis the biggest star in the world. But his decisions often seemed to prioritize short-term profit over Elvis's long-term health and artistic growth. After Elvis came out of the army in 1960, the Colonel pushed him away from live performing and into a string of terrible movies. The films were cheap to make and guaranteed a profit. They also slowly eroded Elvis's credibility as a serious artist. By the 1970s, Elvis was back to performing live, mostly in Las Vegas, and on grueling tours across the country. The schedule was relentless. It was here that the Colonel's management style became truly dangerous. He booked Elvis into city after city, night after night, with very little rest in between. This punishing schedule is what drove Elvis to rely on prescription drugs. He needed uppers to get him ready to perform and downers to get him to sleep after the show. The tour schedule fed the drug habit. The drug habit made the tour schedule possible. It was a vicious cycle. There are countless stories of Elvis being in no condition to perform. He would be slurring his words, forgetting lyrics, barely able to stand. But the Colonel's rule was simple: the show must go on. As long as Elvis could be propped up and pushed onto the stage, the concert would happen. Canceling a show meant losing money, and that was unacceptable. This pressure to perform, no matter the cost to his health, was immense. One of the most damning facts about Colonel Parker is that he was not an American citizen. He was an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands, born Andreas van Koik. He had a mysterious past, and it's widely believed he was afraid of being deported if he ever applied for a passport. This is likely why Elvis never toured internationally during his career, despite huge demand. The Colonel couldn't leave the country, so Elvis didn't leave the country. This kept Elvis stuck in the same grind of US tours and Vegas residencies, limiting his artistic horizons and contributing to his burnout. Did the Colonel know the extent of Elvis's drug problem? It's impossible to believe he didn't. Everyone in the inner circle knew, but the Colonel's approach was to look the other way. As long as the money was rolling in, he didn't interfere. He saw the drugs as a medical issue, something for the doctors to handle. His job was the business. This separation allowed him to abdicate responsibility for the well-being of his only client. After Elvis died, the Colonel's control was eventually challenged in court. The Presley estate sued him for mismanagement, and a 1981 investigation by a court-appointed lawyer found that the Colonel's management deal was highly unethical and that he had not acted in Elvis's best interest. His standard commission was 50%, a figure unheard of in the industry. The question of blame is complex. The Colonel was a master manipulator, but Elvis was a grown man. He could have fired the Colonel at any time, but he didn't. Their relationship was complicated, almost like a father and son. Elvis was loyal, and the Colonel had been with him from the beginning. Perhaps Elvis was too scared, too dependent, or too worn down to make a change. So how much blame does the Colonel deserve? Was he a greedy parasite who worked his star to death for profit? Or was he just a businessman giving his client the work he seemed to want and staying out of his personal life? Did his fear of leaving the U.S. trap Elvis in a cycle of performance and drug abuse that ultimately killed him? And could a different manager have saved him? Number 10. What was the true state of his finances? On the surface, Elvis Presley was rich beyond imagination. He lived in a mansion. He owned a private jet. the Lisa Marie. He bought cars and jewelry on a whim for himself, his friends, and sometimes total strangers. He was the king, and he lived like one, but behind the scenes, the financial picture was surprisingly grim, especially in his final years. He was running out of money. This seems impossible. He was one of the highest earning entertainers in the world. But Elvis had two major financial problems. The first was his spending. It was legendary. His generosity was part of his charm, but it was also reckless. He supported a huge entourage, the Memphis Mafia, paying all their salaries and expenses. His impulsive gifts cost a fortune. His own lifestyle was incredibly expensive. Graceland alone had huge upkeep costs. The second and much bigger problem was Colonel Tom Parker. As his manager, the Colonel took an unprecedented 50% commission on almost all of Elvis's earnings. The industry standard was 10 to 15%. This meant that for every dollar Elvis earned, 50 cents went straight into the Colonel's pocket. Over a 20-year career, this amounted to a staggering sum of money that should have been in Elvis's bank account. The Colonel's business deals were also questionable. In 1973, he engineered the sale of Elvis's entire back catalog of recordings, everything he had recorded up to that point, to the record label RCA. Elvis received a lump sum of about $5,400,000. It seemed like a lot of money at the time, but it meant he would receive no future royalties on hits like Hound Dog or Jailhouse Rock. It was a terrible deal in the long run, a quick cash grab that sacrificed his financial future. The Colonel likely pushed for the deal because he needed the immediate commission. By 1977, the situation was becoming critical. Elvis's main source of income was touring. He had to keep performing to pay the bills. The relentless tour schedule that was destroying his health was also a financial necessity. He was on a treadmill. He had to work to fund his lifestyle and pay the Colonel, but the work was killing him. He was trapped. There were other financial pressures. He had his ex-wife Priscilla and daughter Lisa Marie to support. His father, Vernon, who managed his personal finances, was not a sophisticated businessman and was easily manipulated by the Colonel. The whole financial structure around Elvis was designed to benefit others, primarily the Colonel, at his expense. This financial strain adds another layer of tragedy to his final days. He was planning to start another tour on August 17th. He probably didn't want to go. He was sick, tired, and overweight, but he had to. The machine needed to be fed. The payroll had to be met. The bills had to be paid. He was no longer a free man. He was an employee of his own legend. This raises some deeply unsettling questions. How much did financial worry contribute to his stress and depression? Did he feel like he couldn't stop, couldn't take a break to get healthy, because he was afraid of going broke? Was the image of the wealthy king just a facade, hiding a man who was terrified of losing everything? And the darkest question was he worth more to some people dead than alive? His death triggered an explosion in record sales and merchandise, creating a financial empire far bigger than anything he had in his life. Did anyone around him see that coming? Number 9, why did his health decline so rapidly? In 1970, Elvis Presley met President Richard Nixon at the White House. Photos from that day show a man who looks healthy, handsome, and powerful. He is slim, clear-eyed, and radiates charisma. Just 7 years later, he was dead. The photos from his last concerts in June 1977 are shocking. He is bloated, puffy-faced, and barely recognizable. He looks sick. He looks much older than 42. How could a man's health collapse so completely, so quickly? The simple answer is prescription drug abuse. That was the engine of his destruction. But it's more complicated than that. His poor health was the result of a perfect storm of factors: the drugs, a terrible diet, a lack of sleep, chronic pain, and underlying medical conditions that were either ignored or improperly treated. The drug use started in the army in the late 1950s, where he was introduced to amphetamines to stay awake on duty. It escalated in the 1960s to deal with the pressures of Hollywood, but it spiraled completely out of control in the 1970s with the return to live performing. He was taking a dangerous combination of drugs: opiates like Dilaudid and Demerol for pain, barbiturates like Quaalude and Valium for anxiety and sleep, amphetamines to give him the energy to get on stage. He was playing chemical Russian roulette every single day. These drugs had devastating side effects. The opiates in particular caused severe chronic constipation. This is not a minor issue. It's a serious medical condition. An autopsy after his death reportedly found that his colon was grotesquely enlarged and impacted with fecal matter that was months old. This condition, known as megacolon, can be toxic. It puts immense strain on the internal organs and the cardiovascular system. Some medical experts, like Dr. Forrest Tennant, who reviewed Elvis's medical records for a legal case, have argued that this was a primary cause of his other health problems and ultimately his death. Then there was his diet. His eating habits are the stuff of legend. He loved fried, fatty Southern comfort food. Fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, mashed potatoes, gravy, fried chicken. He would eat to excess. This diet, combined with a near total lack of exercise in his final years, led to massive weight gain. At the time of his death, he was estimated to weigh over 250 pounds, maybe more. This obesity put a terrible strain on his heart. He also suffered from a list of other ailments. He had glaucoma, which caused severe eye pain. He had high blood pressure. He had liver damage, likely from the drug abuse. He may have had an autoimmune inflammatory disorder. A 2014 book, Elvis Presley, A Southern Life, by Joel Williamson, even suggested that he may have had a genetic heart condition. His mother, Gladys, died at age 46 from a heart attack, and several other family members also died young from heart and liver problems. This combination of factors created a body at war with itself. He was in constant pain. He used drugs to numb the pain, but the drugs created new problems. His diet made his health worse. His lack of sleep and upside-down lifestyle disrupted his body's natural rhythms. He was being treated by Dr. Nicopolis, a general practitioner who was clearly in over his head, and was prescribing medications to treat symptoms rather than addressing the root causes of his illness. The unanswered questions are profound. How much of his health decline was due to genetics versus lifestyle? If he had been treated by a team of specialists for his specific conditions, instead of just one easily manipulated doctor, could his life have been saved? And why did no one around him stage a serious intervention? They saw him deteriorating before their very eyes. Why was the decline allowed to continue until it was too late? Number 8, was anyone really trying to help him? When a star dies from a drug overdose, the question always comes up, where were their friends? Where was their family? With Elvis, this question is especially painful because he was constantly surrounded by people. His home, Graceland, was always full. He had his father, his girlfriend, and his entourage of the Memphis Mafia. He was never alone, and yet, in the ways that mattered most, he was completely isolated. So, did anyone try to help? The answer is yes, but their attempts were weak, disorganized, and ultimately doomed to fail. And Elvis was not an easy man to help. He was the boss. He paid everyone's salary. He could hire and fire at will. To challenge him on his drug use was to risk your job, your lifestyle, and your relationship with him. He did not like to be told what to do. He would react with anger, charm, or manipulation to get his way. Linda Thompson, his girlfriend for much of the mid-70s, probably tried the hardest. By her own account, she repeatedly confronted him about the pills. She would flush them down the toilet only for him to have Dr. Nick prescribe more. She pleaded with him, argued with him, and tried to nurse him through overdoses. But after several years, she was exhausted. She realized she couldn't save him from himself. She left the relationship in late 1976, a decision that probably saved her own sanity, but left Elvis without one of the strongest positive influences in his life. Some members of the Memphis Mafia also tried, in their own way. Friends like Jerry Schilling and Joe Esposito have said they talked to him about the drugs. But their words seemed to have little effect. They were his employees, they were also his friends, and they were caught in a difficult position. The bodyguards who wrote Elvis What Happened claimed their book was a final, desperate attempt to help. But as we've seen, that effort, whatever its true motive, backfired. His family was not much help. His father, Vernon, was an old-school Southern man who seemed overwhelmed by his son's fame and problems. He was more focused on the finances and seemed to turn a blind eye to the drug use, perhaps not understanding the difference between prescription drugs and illegal street drugs. Priscilla Presley, his ex-wife, was concerned, especially for the sake of their daughter, Lisa Marie. But she was no longer part of his daily life. She had her own life in Los Angeles. The biggest failure, of course, was Dr. George Nicopolis. A doctor's primary responsibility is to do no harm. Dr. Nick failed this test spectacularly. Instead of being the one person who could stand up to Elvis and say no, he became his chief enabler. His defense was that if he didn't give Elvis the drugs, Elvis would just get them from someone less scrupulous. He claimed he was trying to control the situation, even using placebos at times. But the sheer volume of drugs he prescribed, thousands upon thousands of doses, makes this defense hard to believe. He was not controlling the problem, he was fueling it. In the end, all the attempts to help him were like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. The system around Elvis was designed to keep him performing, not to keep him healthy. The colonel wanted him on stage, the doctors wanted to keep their famous patient happy. The entourage wanted to keep their jobs, and Elvis himself, trapped in a cycle of pain and addiction, did not have the will or the strength to save himself. This leaves us with some of the most difficult questions of all. Could a full-scale, professional intervention, like the kind seen at the Betty Ford Center today, have worked? What if his entire family and all his friends had confronted him together and threatened to walk away if he didn't go to rehab? Was there a single person in his life with enough power and courage to truly stand up to him? Or was he so powerful, so famous, and so lost that no one could have reached him? Number 7, what was his real mental state? We know Elvis's body was falling apart, but what was happening inside his mind? His mental and emotional state in his final years is perhaps the most mysterious and tragic part of his story. He was clearly a man in deep emotional pain. He suffered from depression, paranoia, and crippling loneliness. The roots of his sadness went back a long way. He was haunted by the death of his twin brother, Jesse Garon, who was stillborn. He often said that a part of him was missing. The death of his beloved mother, Gladys, in 1958 devastated him. He never truly got over it. He felt an immense pressure to be Elvis Presley, the superstar, 24 hours a day. He had no privacy, no normal life. He was a prisoner of his own fame. By the 1970s, his mental health was in a steep decline. The drug use was a huge factor. Prescription drugs, especially barbiturates and opiates, are known to cause depression and mood swings. His paranoia grew. He was obsessed with security. He had surveillance cameras around Graceland. He trusted very few people. He would fly into sudden rages, sometimes over trivial things. These were often followed by periods of deep remorse and lavish gift-giving. He also embarked on a series of intense spiritual quests. He read hundreds of books on religion and mysticism. He became fascinated with numerology, the occult, and the afterlife. He would have long, rambling, late-night conversations with his friends about the meaning of life. This was a man searching for answers, searching for a peace that his fame and fortune could not provide. Saw this as a sign of his depth and intelligence. Others saw it as a sign of a man losing his grip on reality. His loneliness was profound. He was always surrounded by his entourage, but he had few, if any, true peers. Who could he talk to? Who would understand his life? He once told a friend, "I'm so tired of being Elvis Presley." He was isolated in the Graceland bubble, living a nocturnal life, cut off from the real world. His relationships with women, including Priscilla and Linda Thompson, ultimately failed because he could not offer them a normal life. Did he ever consider suicide? This is a highly sensitive and debated topic. Some people close to him have flatly denied it. They say his religious beliefs would have prevented him from taking his own life. But his behavior was incredibly self-destructive. Whether he consciously wanted to die or not, he was actively killing himself with his lifestyle. Some of his song choices in his final concerts, like Hurt, My Way, were filled with pain and resignation. In her book, Elvis and Me, Priscilla Presley describes finding a note from him once that read, "I'm sick and tired of my life." There were times when he seemed to just give up. The final blow of the book, Elvis, What Happened? The questions about his mental state are haunting. Was he clinically depressed? Did he suffer from a bipolar disorder that was never diagnosed? How much of his erratic behavior was due to the drugs, and how much was a genuine mental health crisis? And the most frightening question in his final moments, as he sat on the toilet reading a book, did he feel a sense of peace or a sense of despair? Did he know the end was near? And did he, on some level, welcome it? Number 6, what was in the 2 black medical bags? When Elvis Presley died, his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, rushed to Graceland. He was later seen leaving the mansion carrying 2 large black medical bags. Those bags have become a central part of the controversy surrounding Elvis's death and Dr. Nick's role in it. What was inside them, and why did Dr. Nick remove them from the scene? According to testimony from various people who were at Graceland that day, Dr. Nick went upstairs to Elvis's private suite. He spent some time in the bedroom and the bathroom where Elvis was found. When he came down, he had the bag. He was later asked about them by investigators. His story was that the bags contained the routine medical supplies he carried with him, as well as some of the prescription medications he had been giving Elvis. But many people were suspicious. Why take the bags away? If they contained evidence of the drugs Elvis was taking, shouldn't they have been left for the police and the medical examiner? The removal of the bags looked like an attempt to hide evidence, to sanitize the scene before the official investigation began. It suggested that Dr. Nick knew there was something to hide. The contents of those bags are a window into the incredible amount of medication Elvis was consuming. In his 1981 trial for overprescribing drugs, of which he was acquitted, though he later lost his medical license, the scale of his prescriptions was laid bare. In the first 8 months of 1977 alone, Dr. Nick had prescribed more than 10,000 doses of narcotics, sedatives, and amphetamines for Elvis. The prescriptions were often written in the names of various members of the Memphis Mafia to avoid raising red flags with pharmacies. The bags likely contained vials of Dilaudid, Demerol, and other injectable painkillers. They would have had bottles of Quaaludes, Valium, Ethinamate, and other sedatives. There would have been stimulants and laxatives. It was a mobile pharmacy, all for one patient. Dr. Nick claimed he was trying to control Elvis's intake, to wean him off more dangerous drugs he might get on the street. He said he often substituted placebos, sugar pills, to trick Elvis, but this defense is hard to square with the reality of Elvis's condition. He was a severe addict. Dr. Nick was not treating the addiction, he was servicing it. The black bags were a symbol of this deeply unhealthy, codependent relationship between the doctor and his famous patient. The doctor provided the supply, and the patient provided the doctor with a handsome salary, gifts, and access to a glamorous lifestyle. The removal of the bags from Graceland immediately fueled cover-up theories. Was Dr. Nick trying to protect himself? Was he trying to protect Elvis's image? Or was he acting on instructions from Elvis's father, Vernon, or his manager, Colonel Parker? The official investigation into Elvis's death has been criticized for being shallow and incomplete. The scene was not properly secured, evidence was removed, key witnesses were not thoroughly questioned in the immediate aftermath. This leaves us with a set of disturbing, unanswered questions. What specifically was in those bags that Dr. Nick felt he had to remove immediately? Were there drugs prescribed by other doctors? Were there illegal, non-prescription drugs? Was there anything that would have pointed not just to addiction, but to a deliberate, fatal overdose? By taking those bags, Dr. Nick took a piece of the truth with him, leaving a hole in the story that can never be fully filled. Number 5. Why was the original autopsy so flawed? The official cause of Elvis Presley's death was announced just a few hours after he was found. Dr. J. Francisco, the Shelby County medical examiner, told the press that the cause was cardiac arrest due to hypertensive cardiovascular disease with atherosclerotic heart disease. In simple terms, a heart attack. He explicitly stated that drugs had played no role in the death. Prescription drugs were not a factor, he said. This statement was, to put it mildly, not true. And it was the beginning of a cover-up that has clouded the facts of Elvis's death ever since. Why did the medical examiner make such a definitive statement so quickly before the full toxicology results were in? The autopsy itself was performed that same day at Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis. The team of pathologists was led by Dr. Eric Muirhead. What they found was a body ravaged by disease and drug abuse. His heart was indeed enlarged, about twice its normal size. His arteries were severely clogged. But they also took blood, urine, and tissue samples to be sent for toxicological analysis. It would take weeks to get the full results. So Dr. Francisco's press conference was premature and misleading. He was under immense pressure. The world's media had descended on Memphis. Everyone wanted an answer, and they wanted it now. The Presley family, particularly Elvis's father Vernon, was also desperate to protect Elvis's reputation. They did not want him remembered as a drug addict. A heart attack was a cleaner, more respectable way to die. It's widely believed that Vernon Presley and Colonel Tom Parker influenced Dr. Francisco to downplay the role of drugs. When the toxicology report did come back several weeks later, it told a very different story. It found 10 different prescription drugs in Elvis's system, several of them in significant quantities. The list included high levels of codeine, the painkiller he had been given by his dentist the night before he died. It also included Quaaludes, Valium, and other sedatives. Another lab, Bioscience Laboratories, conducted a more detailed analysis and found 14 drugs. Their report concluded that Elvis had likely died from polypharmacy, a toxic interaction between multiple drugs. The chief investigator for the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners, Dr. George C. Nikopoulos, later stated that the combination of drugs, particularly the codeine and the sedatives, would have suppressed his breathing until his heart stopped. Despite this overwhelming evidence, the official cause of death on the death certificate remained cardiac arrhythmia. The family, using their legal power as next of kin, had the full autopsy report sealed from the public for 50 years. It is scheduled to be unsealed in 2027. This flawed initial response and the subsequent secrecy created a firestorm of conspiracy theories. People believed the truth was being hidden. The battle between the heart attack theory and the overdose theory has raged for decades. A 1994 reopening of the investigation by the Shelby County District Attorney's Office concluded that while drug use was a contributing factor, the primary cause was indeed a heart attack. But many experts disagree, pointing to the powerful effect of the drugs found in his system. This leaves us with critical questions about the integrity of the investigation. Why did Dr. Francisco lie to the public in his initial press conference? How much pressure did the Presley family and Colonel Parker put on the medical examiner's office? Does the sealed, full autopsy report contain information that would definitively prove the cause of death was a drug overdose? And when that report is finally opened in 2027, will it settle the debate once and for all, or just create more questions? Number 4, did Elvis have a death wish? This is one of the darkest and most difficult questions surrounding Elvis's final days. Did he want to die? It's not the same as asking if he committed suicide in the traditional sense. It's about whether he had simply given up on life, whether he was engaging in such wantonly self-destructive behavior that he knew, on some level, where it would lead. The evidence for this is circumstantial, but it is compelling. Look at his actions. He was a man who had been warned by doctors for years about his drug use, his diet, and his weight. He had access to the best medical care in the world. He had the money to hire nutritionists, trainers, and addiction specialists. He did none of it. Instead, he continued to eat himself into obesity and pump his body full of a pharmacy's worth of pills. This is not the behavior of a man who is fighting for his life. His conversations with friends in his final months were often morbid. He spoke frequently about his mother's death and his fear of dying young like she did. He was obsessed with the book, The Impersonal Life, a spiritual text that talks about the body being a mere vessel for the soul. Some have interpreted his interest in these spiritual matters as a man preparing for death. There is also the story told by his stepbrother David Stanley in his book, The Elvis Encyclopedia. Stanley claims that in the days before he died, Elvis told him, "The next time I see you will be in a better place." It's a chilling statement if true. However, the accounts of his stepbrothers have often been questioned by others in the Elvis camp, so it's hard to know what to believe. On the other hand, there is evidence that he was making plans for the future. He was engaged to be married to Ginger Alden. He was about to start a new tour. He had talked to his producers about wanting to record new, more serious music. He had ordered new custom-made jumpsuits for the upcoming concerts. These are not the actions of a man who is planning to check out. The reality is likely somewhere in the middle. Elvis was probably deeply conflicted. Part of him may have wanted to live, to get healthy, to be a father to his daughter, to create new music. But another part of him was exhausted. He was tired of the pain, tired of the pressure, tired of being Elvis. The effort required to pull himself out of his addiction and depression may have seemed impossible. The drugs offered an easy escape from his physical and emotional agony. Psychologically, this is a well-known phenomenon. It's called passive suicide. A person doesn't actively take their own life, but they stop caring if they live or die. They engage in high-risk behaviors, neglect their health, and essentially let nature take its course. Elvis's final years look exactly like this. He was slowly, methodically destroying himself. He may not have taken a fatal dose on purpose on August 16th, but his entire lifestyle was a slow-motion suicide. The unanswered questions are profound and deeply personal. What was the balance in his mind between the will to live and the desire to escape? Did he wake up each day hoping to get better, only to be pulled back under by his addiction and depression? Did he feel trapped, believing that death was the only way out of the prison his life had become? And in his final conscious moments, did he feel fear, or did he feel relief? Number 3, could anyone have saved him? This question haunts everyone who is close to Elvis. It haunts his fans. It's the great what if of his story. With all the people around him, with all his money and resources, was his death inevitable? Or was there a moment, a person, an intervention that could have changed the outcome? It's easy to point fingers. We can blame Dr. Nick for the prescriptions. We can blame Colonel Parker for the grueling tours. We can blame the Memphis Mafia for being enablers. We can blame his family for not acting more forcefully. We can blame Elvis himself for his lack of willpower, but the truth is that addiction is a powerful and cunning disease. Saving an addict who doesn't want to be saved is nearly impossible, and Elvis did not want to be saved. Not on anyone's terms but his own. He did not believe he was a drug addict. In his mind, these were not illegal street drugs, they were medicines prescribed by a doctor. He felt he needed them to function, to deal with the pain of his various ailments and the stress of his career. He resisted every attempt to take them away from him. When Linda Thompson flushed his pills, he just got more. When Red and Sonny West tried their The Love Book, he felt betrayed, not enlightened. A modern-day intervention might have looked very different. Today, there is a much greater understanding of addiction as a disease. A professional interventionist could have been hired. The family and friends could have been coached on how to present a united front. He could have been checked into a state-of-the-art rehabilitation facility. But this was the 1970s. The concept of celebrity rehab was not what it is today. And even if it were, there was the problem of Elvis himself. He was the king. He was used to getting his own way. He was surrounded by people who were paid to say yes. For an intervention to work, the participants must be prepared to follow through on their threats. For example, if you don't go to rehab, I will no longer work for you, or I will not let you see your daughter. Would anyone in his circle have had the strength to do that? And would it have worked? Or would he have just fired them all and replaced them with new people who would give him what he wanted? The person who probably had the most power to force a change was Colonel Parker. If the Colonel had canceled a tour and told Elvis he would not book another show until he was clean and healthy, it might have had an impact. But that would have meant turning off the money machine, something the Colonel was philosophically opposed to. His mantra was, the show must go on, and that applied even when the star was dying. Ultimately, the only person who could have truly saved Elvis was Elvis. He would have had to reach a point of rock bottom, a moment of clarity where he realized he was going to die if he didn't change. He would have had to be willing to surrender, to admit he had a problem, and to accept help. For whatever reason, that moment never came. Or if it did, he was too weak, too sick, and too deep in his addiction to act on it. So, we are left with the tragic questions. Was there a missed opportunity, a window of time where he might have been receptive to help? If he had lived just a little longer, would the changing understanding of addiction have provided him with better options for treatment? What would it have taken to break through the wall of denial he had built around himself? And is it possible that he was simply a lost cause, a man so broken by fame, grief, and pain that no one on earth could have pulled him back from the brink? Number 2, why did Vernon Presley seal the autopsy report? Of all the mysteries and controversies surrounding Elvis's death, this is one of the most concrete and infuriating for those seeking the truth. Shortly after the autopsy was completed, Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, had the full, detailed report legally sealed from the public for 50 years. This means that the primary medical document detailing the exact condition of Elvis's body and the findings of the pathologists has been hidden from view since 1977. It is not scheduled to be released until 2027. Why would a grieving father do this? The official reason given was to protect his son's privacy and dignity. Vernon did not want the world to know the sordid details of his son's physical state. He didn't want the headlines to be about drug addiction. He wanted to preserve the myth of Elvis, the beautiful, vibrant king of rock and roll. It was an act of a father trying to control his son's legacy. On a human level, this is understandable. But it also had the effect of fueling decades of suspicion and conspiracy theories. By hiding the report, Vernon created the impression that there was something explosive to hide. If the cause of death was a simple heart attack, as the family and the official story maintained, why not release the report to prove it and end the speculation? Sealing it only made people believe the drug overdose theory more strongly. What could be in that report that is so shocking? We already know about the drug use from the toxicology screens which were leaked. We know about his enlarged heart and his diseased colon from testimony and other sources. So what else is there? One theory is that the report details the full horrifying extent of his physical decay. It might contain graphic descriptions of his weight, the condition of his internal organs, and the severity of his chronic constipation that the family found too embarrassing to release. Another theory is that it might contain evidence of other diseases or conditions that the family wanted to keep private. For example, some researchers have speculated that he may have had bone cancer or another serious illness that he was treating with the massive doses of painkillers. If true, this would recontextualize his drug use. A more sinister theory is that the report contains definitive proof that his death was not just an accidental overdose, but something that could have led to criminal charges beyond what Dr. Nick faced. Perhaps it points so overwhelmingly to medical malpractice that it would have opened up the estate to lawsuits or the doctors to more serious prosecution. The decision to seal the report was likely also influenced by Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel's entire business was built on the Elvis brand. A clean story about a tragic heart attack was much better for business than a messy story about drug addiction. He would have encouraged Vernon to keep the ugliest details under wraps. Whatever the reason, the sealed report has become the holy grail for Elvis researchers. It represents the official truth, locked away in a vault. The fact that we have had to rely on leaks, secondhand accounts, and speculation for decades is a direct result of Vernon Presley's decision. It was a choice that prioritized image over transparency, and in doing so, it has left a permanent question mark at the heart of the story. The final questions about this are simple but profound. What specific finding in that report was the smoking gun that Vernon Presley felt he had to hide from the world? Was he protecting his son's memory, or was he protecting someone who was still alive? And when 2027 finally arrives, will the report answer our questions, or will the truth have been so obscured by time that even the original document can't give us the closure we're looking for? Number 1. What really killed Elvis Presley? This is the final question. It is the one that encompasses all the others. After all the theories, the evidence, the arguments, and the decades of debate, we still have to ask, what was the specific medical event that stopped the heart of the king of rock and roll on August 16, 1977? The answer is not simple. There is no single, easy answer. His death was the result of a long, slow collapse of his entire body and mind. There are two main camps. Camp A argues for the heart attack. They point to the autopsy findings of a severely enlarged heart and advanced atherosclerosis. They lean on Elvis's family history of heart disease. They argue that he had a weak, diseased heart and that it simply gave out. In this scenario, the drugs were a contributing factor. They certainly didn't help, but they were not the primary cause of death. This was the official story, the one his family endorsed, and the one that is still on his death certificate. Camp B argues for the drug overdose. They point to the toxicology reports that found a potent cocktail of depressant drugs in his system. They argue that these drugs, particularly the codeine he took in the hours before his death, suppressed his central nervous system. This would have slowed his breathing and his heart rate until they stopped completely. This is a classic opiate overdose scenario. The state of his heart made him more vulnerable, but the drugs were the trigger. Many medical experts, including those who testified against Dr. Nick, believe this is the most likely cause of death. There is also a third, more recent theory that tries to bridge the gap. It focuses on his severe bowel problems. The theory, championed by writers like Sally Hodel in her book Elvis Destined to Die Young, suggests that Elvis's main problem was not addiction, but a collection of autoimmune and inflammatory disorders, possibly linked to a head injury he sustained in 1967. These disorders caused chronic pain all over his body and led to the catastrophic failure of his digestive system. In this view, he wasn't taking drugs to get high. He was a man in constant, legitimate agony trying to manage his pain. His death, in this context, was caused by the strain put on his heart by his toxic megacolon. He was found on the bathroom floor, and it's believed he was straining on the toilet, an act which can trigger a fatal heart event in a compromised person. This is known as Valsalva's maneuver. So which is it, a bad heart, a drug overdose, or a body poisoned by a complex web of diseases? The truth is probably a tragic combination of all three. His heart was a ticking time bomb. The drugs he was taking were depressing his body's ability to function. His chronic constipation and other health issues were putting immense strain on his entire system. It was a perfect storm. Any one of these things might not have killed him on that specific day, but together they made his death almost inevitable. He went into the bathroom. He sat down to read. The codeine from the dentist, mixed with the other sedatives in his system, would have made him drowsy and slowed his breathing. The physical act of straining on the toilet would have put sudden pressure on his damaged, oversized heart. At that moment, something had to give. The electrical rhythm of his heart was disrupted, and it stopped beating. Cardiac arrhythmia, the cause on the death certificate, is probably technically correct, but it tells none of the story of why it happened. The final, unanswerable questions remain. What was the precise sequence of events in his body in those last few moments? Was it the drugs that stopped his breathing, which then stopped his heart? Or was it his heart that gave out first under the strain? Does it even matter? He was a man who had been dying in slow motion for years, a victim of his fame, his pain, his addictions, and the failure of those around him to save him from himself. The mystery of his death is not about a single pill or a single diagnosis. It is about the total heartbreaking collapse of a human life.